Welcome to this explainer. Okay, if you've ever found yourself just staring blankly at a screen, literally unable to focus to save your life, well, you're absolutely in the right place. Today, we're going to completely rewrite your cognitive architecture. We're taking a really hard, data-driven look at exactly why your focus feels so fundamentally broken right now. And more importantly, we're going to give you the exact systems engineering required to actually fix it. So get ready, because we're moving way past traditional time management and stepping straight into the world of behavioral telemetry. Let's do this!
So ask yourself, are you managing your time, or are you actually just ruining your state? Look, it's incredibly common to go to bed super motivated, right? You promise yourself, tomorrow I'm doing a massive 10-hour deep work sprint, only to wake up and instantly default right back to scrolling. Well, I want to validate that frustration right out of the gate. Your lack of focus, it's not a moral failure. It's really not a discipline problem. It's actually a structural brain glitch. You're trying to run high-level cognitive software on hardware that is literally buckling under the weight of its modern environment.
And the empirical proof of that structural glitch? It is staggering. Research from Dr. Gloria Mark shows that back in 2004, the average time we spent focused on a single screen before switching to another task was about 2.5 minutes. But today, that number has completely collapsed down to just 47 seconds. 47 seconds! Just let that sink in for a moment. We are essentially panic-switching our attention every single minute. Our brains are constantly adapting to an environment that demands this rapid-fire task switching, and honestly, it's destroying our capacity for deep, meaningful thought.
Section 1. The always grinding myth. Okay, let's dive into this.
Because we absolutely need to bust this toxic illusion of hustle culture. The always-on mentality basically treats your brain like a machine that can just run indefinitely without consequence. But clinically speaking, constantly grinding without structured breaks leads directly to a depleted dopamine baseline, heavy brain fog, and just incredibly high anxiety. Now contrast that with state management. State management recognizes that, hey, your brain is a biological system. By actually managing your cognitive state rather than just counting the minutes on a clock, you can achieve peak cognitive absorption. You actually enter a true flow state, instead of just this exhausted, low-yield grinding we're also used to.
And here's the thing, if you try to stay always on while constantly bouncing between tasks, you're paying a massive hidden penalty. Every single time you check a text message, or glance at an email, or even just interact with a quick pop-up notification, you suffer a cognitive tax that instantly drains 40% of your mental RAM. That's huge. Your prefrontal cortex has a very finite amount of working memory, and every single app switch creates a literal memory leak.
We call this the context switching tax. It's the silent killer of productivity. We're bombarded with so much high-velocity, low-value information all day long that it severely burdens our brain's natural filtering system. So the crucial takeaway here is this. If staring at a blank work document for 5 minutes gives you actual physical anxiety, it's not because the work itself is too hard. It's because your filtering system is experiencing the cognitive equivalent of a DDoS attack from all those rapid-fire stimuli. Your brain is utterly exhausted before you even type a single word.
Section 2. State over time management. This is where the paradigm shift happens.
You don't need more time, you need better state management. Think about your brain sort of like a server that's processing network latency. When you sit down to, say, write an essay or build a business, the real reward for that is probably months away. The human brain treats those long-term future rewards as having incredibly high network latency, and because that reward signal takes so long to arrive, your brain just abandons the connection. It actively hunts for the lowest latency server available, which, let's be honest, is usually a 15-second social media video. You don't need an extra hour in your day. You need a state management system that actually accounts for this latency.
And this right here is exactly why your current system keeps failing. You're relying on willpower. But willpower is a depreciating asset. Relying on sheer discipline to avoid those low-latency distractions, it's like trying to brute force a super complex password. It drains your energy completely, and it almost always fails in the end. Instead of that, we must artificially manipulate our latency by automating our physical and digital environments.
Section 3. The Deep Work Sprint. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is
How we can actually outsmart our own biology with a systemic solution. Let's mathematically break down this 90-minute protocol. Step 1 is algorithmic friction. You absolutely must artificially increase the latency of your distractions using app blockers. Just make it physically impossible to access your dopamine sinks. Step 2 is micro-milestones. You've got to artificially decrease the latency of your work by breaking that 90-minute block into 2 tight 45-minute sprints.
Why do we do this? Because you have to feed the brain's craving for short-term completion. And then step 3 is the immediate reward. The very second a 45-minute sprint ends, you give yourself a low-latency reward to deeply reinforce that positive behavioral loop.
This entire sprint mechanism relies heavily on what behavioral economists call commitment devices. Basically, you have to literally trap your present self into making good decisions for your future self. Adding algorithmic friction, like a really strict website blocker that you absolutely cannot bypass, is the ultimate system patch. It completely removes the choice from the equation entirely, meaning you don't have to spend a single drop of your precious willpower deciding whether or not to check your phone.
Section 4. Engineering Absolute Recovery. This is all about building an offline architecture.
But listen, a sprint is only half of the equation here. This is super counterintuitive for high achievers, but true. Sustained peak focus requires mandatory, structured offline recovery to actually repair your cognitive baseline. So here is the clinical absolute offline recovery protocol. First up, you need 150 minutes of aerobic exercise per week, like brisk walking or cycling. Second, you absolutely must secure 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. And third, you need a daily mindfulness practice, just sitting still for a few minutes a day. And I want to be very, very clear about this. Stepping away from your desk to do these things is not being lazy. It is a biological imperative required to clear out the stress hormones that are actively injuring your brain's filtering systems.
And this brilliantly illustrates the hard science behind it all. When you sleep, you are literally clearing out the toxic proteins that injure your brain and cause that awful brain fog. And when you engage in aerobic exercise, you're massively increasing the availability of brain chemicals that promote entirely new neural connections. You are physically repairing your cognitive hardware offline so that your software can run flawlessly when you finally sit back down to execute a deep work sprint.
Section 5. Rewriting your operating system. Let's look at your behavioral source code.
See, we're no longer talking about simply trying to build a quote-unquote good habit. A goal-oriented identity relies almost entirely on sheer willpower. It's super fragile, it's exhausting, and as the data clearly shows us, it is absolutely destined to crash. But a systems-oriented identity, that is completely different. This is where you audit your environment, you automate your friction, and you use those commitment devices to lock in your behavioral changes permanently. You aren't just crossing your fingers and hoping you'll focus today. You've engineered an environment where focus is literally the only available output.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative question to chew on. Will you continue to brute force a failing system, desperately relying on that toxic, always grinding illusion? Or will you take the data we've covered in this explainer, implement some real algorithmic friction, and permanently rewrite your behavioral source code today? The choice to step into peak cognitive performance is entirely yours. Try starting your first deep work sprint today and just see the difference for yourself.